Yes, a very good afternoon and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Romy Busuk, of course, and coming to you yet again with another pertinent conversation on gender-based violence. The impact of violence against women and girls is actually untold, and it translates into setbacks on national development and also drains national resources in huge cost of response services in that regard. Now, to make sense of this discussion and a lot more, I'm now joined by Eliot Orizarwa, the founder and executive director for the Women and Child Development Association. She's not alone. We are also joined by Susanna Chen. She is the current program lead of women's rights and access to justice at Uganda Women's Network. Ladies, a very good afternoon. Thank you for joining me right here on NTV Uganda.
Good afternoon, Romeo.
All right, I'm going to start with you, Orizarwa. 2021 has been that year that has seen a lot of pressure being meted out on our young girls. Even 2020, if you will, 354,000 teenage pregnancies were registered in 2020 alone, and in 2021, for the first 6 months, January up to June, we did notice 196,000 teenage pregnancies, if you will. So if you are to tally all those pregnancies, adding on to the number of pregnancies added in July, August, September, October, and now in November, we could be talking about 600,000 teenage pregnancies in that regard. So Orizarwa, paint for us a picture of 2021. The violations, what have you seen?
Thank you, Romeo, and the viewers. My name is Eliot Orizarwa. As Romeo says, I work for Women and Child Development Association, and we work closely with Uganda Women's Network, and that's why we are here today. Romeo, the picture is too huge. I still believe that the numbers you have mentioned is still low if we really go back. I was thinking about last night, looking into that if Uganda can still look at this picture in terms of how other countries did the contact tracing for COVID, maybe we may get more numbers. When you move around Uganda, in different regions, we look at the picture being huge and being broad in a way that there are those who talk out, there are those who are silent, and there are those who feel it shouldn't be known. So the picture is too big, but in different regions, and maybe I will give you one district or 3 districts, and maybe just starting with where we are in Wakiso. It was hard for the 6 months because definitely the lockdown, the schools not being open, and then some of the markets not really open. Then looking at how the mothers and the fathers were not working, unemployed, and then definitely having drinking within the household. The mother drinking, the father drinking, and some of the children drinking. And that led again into the issues of abuse, and that's why the teenage pregnancies increased. In Wakiso, where we have different people being there, different tribes living in spaces where you were not supposed to live as a human being. And then if you move around Uganda again, I will give you a case in mind of recent where we were in Chegegwa, and we visited some place called Bugunga, and it was sad. It was sad.
What did you see?
Meeting 1,000 people and just having a question of asking mothers if they have girls who have been pregnant during COVID, and you see 10 to 12 women putting their hands up and bringing the girls in front, and definitely where you know that the laws don't allow us to take pictures and even bringing them in front. But the mother feels like if I bring this girl come in front and people watch them, then they will give help. The picture is too huge if we talk about issues of gender-based violence, though we usually leave out the issue of sex and gender-based violence. But I think it was huge in a way that some of the women, if you go to the police stations, the number may be big. Some of the cases were out of being beaten. Some of the cases were out of being, make them sleep out of their houses. Some of the cases were running away because there is no food out of the children. Definitely violence becomes too huge in a way that you are abusing the mother, you are abusing the child, and therefore it becomes a very big issue, the development of this country.
Well, Elliot Orizarwa, we are getting information from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics that indicates that 51.9% of our women actually are experiencing kind of sexual violence, spousal violence, if you will. And 22% of those women are experiencing sexual violence. 35% of our young girls, the teenagers, are experiencing actually more untold suffering when it comes to sexual violence at 35%. But I was talking to members of the Justice, Law and Order sector, that is Mr. Sam Rogers Wairagala, to be exact, and he said cases of GBV are reducing in the country. I tried to make my pitch telling him about the 600,000 teenage pregnancies and how they translate into GBV cases, but he tells me according to the JLOS order sector, they are actually noticing a dwindling number of these cases. What do you make of that?
Robert, let me give you an example.
Is it away from reality?
I also become my own police.
Indeed.
In my own way. Yesterday but one.
Indeed.
I called the OC Rubale. Rubale is found in Ntungamo district. And there was a case which was huge, of which maybe the numbers you are talking about have not even gone to that police station.
I see.
And she was telling me, Elliot, this is too huge for you even to handle. It is too huge for me to handle. And therefore, that's why we need courts at every district. Because the case is too huge in a way that I don't understand who is abusing the other. So if he says that the cases are reducing, I completely disagree with him. And maybe the listeners and the viewers, they can also still tell that if you are living in a radius of maybe 5 meters, and there are how many households, if you go to the slum areas, you find that there is a woman who's abused every night. Sometimes the neighbors may not know the reasons, but sometimes it may be rape, sometimes it may be alcohol, sometimes maybe the husband has not brought food in the house, but he wants to eat. So I don't think we have those numbers. And yes, I know we have organizations in Uganda. First of all, when you talk of Uganda Women's Network, we have organizations that they do research, and mainly in civil society we do surveys and we do situation analysis. But if you really observe, Romy, I don't know where you live, but
Nasa Uganda.
No, not you. Nasa Uganda, definitely, if we really got serious to go household by household, as I said before, that if we used the model of contact tracing and find out who is abused this night, the number, we may not even tell the number.
Actually, you should ask me, Orizarwa, because I come from there. I could tell you right now that 85% of the young girls within this area, 15 to around 25, have been impregnated. Yes. That's how terrible it is.
I agree with you.
And mothers are also involved. They're sending their young children onto the streets to actually engage in prostitution.
Sure.
To bring back some food at home, salt, if you will. So the situation is dire.
Sure. Romeo, when you say that you live, I don't want us only to talk about Wakiso, Nansana. I want to talk about the rural areas. We have cases. If someone says, Elliot, take me, where they have brought girls from Viende, from Kamuli to come and hide in Kampala to work. Some of them were fetched and they ask them to go and work, but when you get there, you find the girls are pregnant. And people are saying, no, we have to take them back. So if I was doing my research, and I was doing research in Nansan, and I found maybe there were 5 households with maids who had been fetched from maybe Busoga region. By the time I go back to Busoga and those girls are back, then it's not clear for us, and I think we need to put, I think, more money into research, and maybe in deeper research to understand exactly what is happening, what is the level of abuse.
Especially on the part of government.
In the part of
the
government.
NGOs are doing their part.
Yes.
That is Elliot Orizarwa, the founder and executive director for the Women and Girl Child Development Association. Let's also bring in, that is Susan Chen. She is a lawyer. She is also the current program lead of women's rights and also access to justice at Uganda Women's Network. What did you see, Susan Chen, in the year 2021 as far as human rights violations are concerned being meted out to our young girls?
Before I go into that, I would just like to build on what Elliot has said.
Indeed.
About the statistics. One, there's the question of statistics, of cases not being reported, but also there is no linkage between informal GBV management systems or informal GBV justice management systems and government institutions. But we have mechanisms for managing GBV in the informal settings. We have clans, we have the church, we have the mosque, we have the religious, the cultural leaders. So there are cases that are reported there, which may not filter into the government statistics. And that may be why a government official believes that the statistics are speaking a different story.
Because they are focusing on what has been reported
Yes.
at the police station or health center.
Exactly.
I see.
But there's also the question of our consciousness of what violence against women is. As a country, we still view certain many acts of abuse against women as normal. You know, it's part of our socialization, catcalling women, wife battering,
Indeed.
men beating their sisters in the name of discipline and looking after them.
I
It is
see.
cultural because the clan mandates male figureheads in a family to take care.
So
of the women
punishment
in
is
the
part
system.
of the caring.
Yes. So in that sense, you will find that cases of abuse are actually not viewed as such.
Indeed.
And they're swept under the rug for that matter.
Of course, this is culture, Susan Chen,
Yes.
but then one too many times we've heard that even the women, fellow women, are actually saying that it is okay to batter another woman to put her in check.
Yes. Again, it comes
Where
back,
is that coming up?
it comes down to our socialization because the fabric of our makeup says it is okay for you to be punished if you do X, Y, and Z. If you look at statistics from the Uganda Demographic Health Survey, they consistently provide information on reasons why women think they should be beaten. If I have burnt food, that warrants, you know, a punishment for me. If I went to the well and delayed,
What
it is
will you do?
okay if I am
see.
reprimanded or if a slap comes my way, you know. So there's also the socialization.
It's been normalized.
It has been normalized. We do not know. Many people do not actually know that some of these actions are an act of abuse.
Indeed.
Yes, and it's not only in the community, even in institutions that are expected to manage gender-based violence, there are areas of violence that are becoming more prevalent, and we are not yet well equipped to handle them. If you look at areas of online violence, cyber violence, those are not things that we are yet ready to address. Issues of sexual harassment,
Indeed.
there's still a gray line between what is sexual harassment and what is a sexual assault. Many people cannot clearly define that. And when these cases come before institutions, sometimes the persons in those dockets are not able to adjudicate these cases in the way that is required.
We've seen victims of GBV go to police stations and then the police officer says, do you have 100,000 for us to expedite an investigation so that you can go and get checked in a medical center? So don't you think such acts are actually negating the ability of these victims of GBV to come forward and report these cases, knowing that for me to actually ensure that my case goes through, I need to be coughing some money at the police station for the investigations and so forth. And many of these cases, when they make their way to court, the courts are actually telling them, please go and mediate outside court. And you know how it ends. The perpetrator walks free after coughing some little money.
Yes, those are some
This
of
justice system.
Those are some of the very common structural problems that we continue to see, but it speaks to the capacity of the institutions to manage GBV, to manage any case that is reported to them. Sometimes this is not in any way to make an excuse for these institutions.
Indeed.
But there are times when you will walk into a police station and they do not have paper. I'm not speaking about police stations in Kampala.
They have to give you a
Think
piece of
about-
paper so that you go and photocopy outside the
Yes,
police station.
they do
I've
not
seen that
have
happen.
paper. I have personally had an experience where I needed to report a case and I was told, please come back a little later. We do not have a red pen. This was
Can you
some years
imagine?
ago. Now these are the realities.
And of course, justice delayed.
Yes.
Is
Or
justice
if
denied.
you are in an upcountry station and there is only one vehicle for that district and the car that day has driven to the opposite, to the farthest end of the district on another mission,
Indeed.
any other business is going to wait until that vehicle comes back.
Indeed.
So there's a question of resourcing, which drives police, not just the police, institutions, to make some of these requests. And that is where the abuse of office comes in. It is taken advantage of, and at the end of the day, the survivors or their family are the ones who are disadvantaged.
But the funny thing about this, Susan Chen, is that the justice, law and order sector doesn't know that this is happening. I asked Sam Waragala in the morning today, and he said, Romy, I don't know that police officers are asking for money. If it's happening, it's illegal. Romy, I also don't know that courts are actually asking victims to settle out of court. But many of the NGOs have been giving us this information, that many of the cases are being thrown out into mediations. Perpetrator pays some money and is let off hook. So what do you make of the fact that even the justice, law and order sector doesn't even know that these things are happening among their institutions that they are supposed to be overseeing?
I think that would be really a very tragic position to be in, because if you even go and look at reports from the Inspectorate of Government,
indeed,
yes, regularly the judiciary, for example, has ranked as one of the most corrupt. The police has also been ranked as an institution where there's a lot of corruption happening. So it's a bit difficult to believe that our government institutions would be that uninformed about what is going on.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Let's break down the issue of these human rights. Are women's rights human rights? We'd like to break that down, because you did say that some people are failing to define it. And of course, it also comes post International Human Rights Day. We did actually mark the end of the 16 days of activism. That is on Friday last week, the 10th of December. So let's talk about that. Women's rights, are they also human rights?
Yes. Women's rights are human rights. They are not, they are one and the same. The reason women's rights have a special place in advocacy is really because women have been found to bear the brunt of most discrimination.
Indeed.
They've been found to be more disadvantaged in case of adversity. Now, women's rights are not a creation, they're not a figment of for example, women's activists' imagination. They are set in frameworks, and it starts right from the international setting. We have frameworks at the international setting that specifically speak to women's rights. For example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We commonly call it the CEDAW. We also have, for Africa in particular, we have what we call the Maputo Protocol. The Maputo Protocol is an extraction from the Charter, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Now, the protocol speaks directly to women's rights, and it speaks about rights across the board: economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, civil rights, political rights for women. The important thing to note is that all these international statutes, and even those that are not exclusively for women, will speak about all persons. They do not say men or boys. They do not say women or girls. They say all persons. And that is the standard that Uganda as a country has adopted. If you look at our constitutions, it also speaks about equality for all persons under the law. But the constitution also has an article that specifically speaks about women's rights, Article 33. So women's rights are human rights, but special attention is needed to promote, to protect, because the world in nature is patriarchal.
Indeed.
Yes, the world globally is really patriarchal.
Indeed.
And that has created an imbalance in power. It has created imbalances, inequalities in the way that women are viewed, girls are viewed, which places them second best where business is concerned.
All right, that is Susan Achen. She is the current program lead of women's rights and also access to justice at Uganda's Women Network. We also do have Elliot Orizara, the founder and ED for Women and Girl Child Development Association in that regard. Elliot, 35% of our young girls are being sexually abused. 59% of all females overall have reported being sexually abused at some point during childhood. Well, what is the true cause of gender-based violence towards national development? Break it down for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. The best of all, I did development studies.
Indeed.
And
that is in Kumba University?
I don't know. How did you read my CV? But
Indeed.
the most important thing, definitely, one definition that I remember in development is that development is a process. But for our country, the process is delaying. And the process is delaying because of what Susan is talking about. We have those international conventions, we have those legal reforms of which we are signed to, but we have not really gone into deeper to know exactly if I consented that I'm going to follow the CEDAW, then I must know that women's empowerment is Center for Development.
Indeed. And
we have gone beyond of what Susan mentioned, that the patriarchal tendencies, the issue of looking at women and girls as just a by the way. That's how I may say it. I don't know in your household, Romy, I always use your name because I'm seated with you.
Indeed,
but I'm just putting you in the picture of the men outside.
Indeed.
How do you feel that if your daughter has not gone to the best school, how do you feel that your daughter has not been earned a degree?
Indeed.
How do you feel that your daughter has finished a degree, but that degree is not measured in terms of the best degree, and maybe your daughter has no grandfather in one of the companies that is going to get a job?
That would be deplorable.
Yeah, that would be a problem. So when you look at the level of unemployment,
Indeed.
if you look at the level of unemployment, and I usually want us to look at the 3 levels, which are the micro of the individual people. Even people are working. They are working, but what they are earning can't sustain them. If you look at the society where we live, the number of people that are unemployed is higher than the people that we have produced from the universities. Those who have a degree, I'm talking about the degrees cases, but even those who have gone to tertiary institutions that have already seen their parents selling their land and selling their property to give them education. But again, unemployment becomes a problem. If you go beyond that, you look at development in relation to the cases that we have for GBV. First of all, if you move around, like I said, as civil society and mainly Uganda Women's Network that work with different women.
Indeed.
If you asked the reasons why there is increase of gender-based violence, the first thing will tell you poverty. And you know, poverty is too huge that when you unpack it, you find that some people are poor because they don't have land. You know, in different regions, you find that some people are poor because they are idle, they don't have work, they are unemployed. So what happens? What happens to a husband or to a young boy who is going to marry a girl, and maybe the girl has that education and has employment, but then the man is not working? Definitely will come home asking for this lady to give her money. And if she does not give her money, then definitely she has to be slapped. And remember, we are talking about gender-based violence not only in terms of battering the women, but even looking at the economical violence, looking at the physical violence, and looking at emotional.
Denying them access to land and so forth.
Yes, denying them access to land, even access to property within the household. So it becomes a very big magnitude.
And of course, Orizarwa, many people have died because of COVID-19.
Yes.
If a member of the household, a man dies, the widows are being chased off their land by the relatives of the deceased.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're looking at how gender-based violence has really hindered development. And I was looking at the issue of unemployment, high levels of unemployment, issues of increased poverty, and issues of, I won't just use those 3 words. If you go to different regions, you find that one of the causes of GBV is alcoholism. People drink and drink themselves. When I think again I was with Uganda Women's Network.
Indeed.
We moved to almost like 5 villages in the morning by between 7:30, and we found men seated near where they do waraji. How do you call it? They cook waraji, you know.
Indeed.
And most of them were drunk, calling us. That is also part of violence. We would stop to see exactly what is happening. Men at 7:30 already around the drum cooking waraji, and most of them are drunk. So definitely the end result is this man is going to go home maybe when money is over, and he wants to sell maybe the matoke, or they want to sell the kilo of rice if we use the eastern region.
All the females harvest from the agricultural fields.
Yes, and definitely you find the fights start. It becomes a very big problem. So when again you look at the budget for this country, you don't seem to see any amount that is allocated specifically to cater for these things. Susan mentioned that some of the police officers, with due respect, don't have the information. This woman comes and says, my husband has beaten me. The next thing the policeman is going to ask you, how do I reach your house? I think we found again this in Katakwi, inside in Katakwi. And the local councillor said, for me, I have nothing to do. These women come to me to report, but I can't even reach police because I can't reach there. The police station is far, and I can't manage going there. This man moves from one village to another because he has to go with another woman.
Because
so
the police
case
station is
yes, the police station is far. The case is already killed. So what are we saying? If we really want to see development in this country, and maybe because we are talking of sustainable development, we want to see Uganda as a country putting money that can really cater for these cases of GBV.
Of course, earlier Torizarwa,
Yes.
cases of GBV can also lead to actually food famine.
Yes.
Famine can take center stage because 75% of the people in agriculture in Uganda, majority of whom are women. So if you are violating these women, there's going to be loss of productivity. They won't be able to go to the fields to till that land so that the country can be fed.
If you talk about that,
Isn't that a worrying trend?
Yeah, I will take you to that worrying trend, and I will take you to the West, where we were in last week. We decided to go to the West because before, when you read through different books, when you read different information, people who have been thinking, even the planners have been thinking that gender-based violence is high in the north and in Karamoja region because of the war that was there, because the mental cases that were there. But today, if you have been following the cases, if you have been reading the papers, you see that now the western region things are becoming worse. Women have stopped going to plant. They are saying there's no reason why I'm going to plant my sorghum, plant my Irish potatoes, and then my husband comes back and sells it. So I need to sit down. So when you bring out the issue of famine, it is a very, very, very critical issue. And then it takes us back to the issue of food security, and which, if we don't talk about it, if we don't come openly to speak to it, it is going to be a very big problem. What am I saying? If my husband comes home and there is no food, he has to go to drink. And then if he comes back, what happens? There is no food. Then maybe he needs his what you usually call that is your right. Then if I say no, it's a bit. I have to get out of the house and run. And when I run, my children definitely are going to run with me. So meaning that the violence is becoming it is becoming big in a way that your child is abused, the wife is abused, and at the end, if you have been following what the Archbishop of Uganda is saying, it's like, no, women rights, stop talking about women issues and girls issues. We need to talk about the boy issue, and which is a good thing. But we need to know again, and calling it up open with the Archbishop, we need to know which type of empowerment do we want to give to the boys. Which type of empowerment do we want to give to the girls? As Susan said, it is not all about that we need to start saying government should allot more funds for GBV, government should make sure that there's allocated funds to make sure that the women are happy, but there is that history. There is that history that if you really educate a girl, you have educated the world. That is one thing. But if you have educated women, and if you have empowered women, and empowerment definitely, Romeo and Achen, we all know that it is too huge. But for us to now want to talk about economic empowerment of women, and the reasons are, we don't have enough land. If you go around region Uganda, in the 143 districts, if you go, they tell you the first problem that we have is land. Because land, if you don't have land, then it increases poverty. Because we know definitely that 75 to 80% of women, of Ugandans depend on agriculture. But we can't do agriculture without land. So it becomes a problem. So we are talking of empowerment in a way that I don't know if you are aware of the Ugandan program, that at the Ministry of Gender, we have a program of UWEP, which we really appreciate the government. And then we have the program of Youth Livelihood Program, which we also appreciate government. But the way it is implemented is not the way that is going to help us to make sure that the woman and the girl child is at the center of development. It has been on, but I don't think we have seen some strides that there is a reduction in poverty, or there is a reduction in unemployment, or we see that women economic empowerment has increased.
All right.
And yeah.
That is Elliot Olizara. Thank you very much. Let's also bring in Susan Chen and talk about another issue largely concerning the impact of all this. Peace Mutuzo, the State Minister for Gender and Culture, came out a couple of days ago. I think it was yesterday. And she did mention that we need actually to ensure that we deal with the burgeoning cases of gender-based violence in our country. She also actually said enough is enough. We are actually seeing too much. But in your own perspective, as UWONET, what kind of mechanisms are in place to help us prevent violence against women and girls, and also uphold women's rights?
Just before I go to that,
you can react.
I would like to say that countries that are performing excellently on the Human Rights Index, countries like Sweden, Norway, Iceland, take deliberate steps to address areas where violence against women, or areas where inequality between women and men occurs.
New Zealand too, they ended up with a female prime minister.
Yes, and we should not be shy to aspire to their standards. We tend to say, but that is Europe, we cannot afford that. No, they started from somewhere, and so can we. It is a question of planning.
Did they start with doing away with affirmative action and also creating a conducive environment where women can thrive?
You've stated it precisely. It's about creating an enabling environment where women can thrive. And it's about looking at those sectors that are particularly important for women.
Indeed.
And what is it really that is going to enable a woman to advance the same as a man? It is education, it is access to economic inputs, it is access to property, it is the capacity to participate in decision making, you know? And that is where, as a country, we need to prioritize those areas for women. Every 5 years, with the change of the national government, the women's movement also launches a manifesto. And right now we have a manifesto that is running from 2021 to 2026. And there are 5 priority issues. One is women's leadership. We also have health and well-being. There is women's work and economic empowerment. There's also access to justice. There are other cross-cutting issues like climate change, technology. Now, how are we as a country enabling women to access those areas equitably as men? But if we continue to pay a blind eye to all the teenage pregnancies that are happening, then there's a problem. Nobody reports about, for example, the perpetrators of defilement. How are these girls getting pregnant? But the headlines will say 5,000 girls pregnant.
But some are being violated by their own parents, cousins, nephews.
Yes, you'll never see a headline that says, that reads 5,000 men defile girls.
I see.
So we are ignoring the issues. For as long as we ignore the number of girls that are getting pregnant, and when they get pregnant, they fall out of school, then they are forced into marriage, and then they're in that environment where they're not growing their capacity, they're not becoming competitive, they do not have any property. You know, they're not going to get out of a certain, you know, box of poverty and suffering.
The intergenerational cycles of poverty. And of course, all this is happening, Susan Chen, in the wake of these very, very strong laws on GBV and policies on the same. And the viewer is wondering, how is it that we are seeing an exponential rise in GBV cases, yet we have these very strong laws and policies? What could be the problem?
Now, that goes to the question that you had asked, which Honorable Mutuzo has expressed support towards handling. Indeed, the government has the government has machinery for, you know, addressing gender-based violence. There are also laws. There are many laws, you know, and they are robust. The question is in the implementation and in the enforcement of the laws. Now, the question of the institutions, again, as I earlier said, some of them are hampered by their capacity because of the resourcing.
Indeed.
You know?
So they can't implement the laws and the policies.
The implementation then becomes a problem.
Indeed.
But the institutions are there, and for us who do this work, for whom this is our bread and butter, we have reached a point at which we actually appreciate what they are doing.
I see.
Yes, because we see and understand the contexts in which they are working and the challenges that they face.
Indeed.
One of those challenges, incidentally, is the community. You know, some of these systems are actually set in place, but we as the community, how are we playing our part in preventing, in condemning, in being very intolerant to violence against women?
Besides the laws and the policies, what kind of other mechanisms are in place to help us deal with or prevent violence against women and girls, and also uphold women's rights?
I would just mention the structures under the formal systems. We have, I would start with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development that is mandated to manage issues of women and girls. And really there is a lot of work going on within the Ministry of Gender that is aimed at enabling communities to avoid, to prevent, to respond to violence against women.
Indeed.
Yes.
All right.
We also have the police institutions under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, but particularly under the Governance and Security Program.
That is JLOS.
Yes, the former JLOS. So we have the institution of police, which is the first stop for anyone that has a complaint. And police will investigate, police will apprehend, police will collect evidence, police will participate in court proceedings, and they also play another role in mediating, in providing counseling for many of these cases actually.
Indeed.
And they work hand in hand with other institutions like the Department of Community-Based Services at district levels. They work with the departments of health, they work with the departments of education, and speaking really at the local government level, because that is the machinery that is there.
Indeed.
Now, all of that is complemented by the work of civil society.
Indeed.
Civil society works hand in hand, and I must say that, again, I like to speak about the district levels, because at the national level things are a little bit, things are very different, by the way. They tend to be quite different. But at the district level, if you've had an opportunity to work with institutions at that level, there is actually a will to provide support for these cases.
You see, the fact that we are now seeing a shrinking civic space, people who are working in that space of, you know, helping these young teenagers, helping them with sexuality education and so forth, some of which saw their organizations shut down in August of this very year. 54 NGOs were shut down. Do you think this is going to further degenerate this problem that we are dealing with, the fact that government is stopping those people who would have helped them, ideally at the district level, like you're saying, to actually front more services, legal or health, to these victims?
Yes, when organizations are unable to work, or if their resources are not accessible to them,
Indeed.
then their capacity to run some of their programs is highly limited.
Do you believe that's why we have 600,000 cases of teenage pregnancies right now? And do you think it would have been different if you were allowed to do your job?
I wouldn't tag it to us, because handling GBV is a multi-sectoral.
Because your funds were frozen late last year.
Okay.
You were doing some good work.
I wouldn't say that the spikes in GBV are because any organization was unable to
reach out to the victims.
Because the need, the gaps are so huge. We are all just cogs.
It's part of the
fitting
of
together.
The gaps.
Yes, we are all contributing. But then the need is much bigger even than the actors in the field.
The need is much bigger than even the actors in the field. Let's also bring in Elliot Orizaro and talk about some solutions in that regard. Recommendations. What is the role of the cultural and religious leaders in this fight? All right, Elliot Orizaro, let's interrogate that subject. The role of the cultural and religious leaders. One too many times this has been happening.
Thank you so much. I don't remember whether we have cultural leaders in Ruchiga. In the West.
We don't.
Yes, but I know they are very, very important. And religious leaders are also very important. We also put them under civil society, actually. We work together. Susan can bear me witness that we have not had a meeting talking about gender-based violence where we don't have Mr. Olinga with us, where we don't have the Interreligious Council with us, and having the dialogues. It is very, very important. If I have one issue. When it comes to the issue of silence, it becomes hard. And when if we want to solve this problem of sex and gender-based violence, we must wake up. We must speak out.
Empower the victims.
Empower the victims to speak out. Even your neighbors to speak out. There is a case. If I just leave the issue of cultural leaders aside, there's a case where I found a woman was beaten, and the neighbors were there saying, "Let them beat her. Beat her, beat her. We are tired of this woman, you know." Until I said, no, we need to know why she's being beaten, and we had to bring them together. And one of the reverends was near where this woman was being beaten, and I had to ask the reverend, "Do you think this is right to see people being beaten?" And the reverend said, "You may find the man is right." Because the man can't just beat the wife outside the house. So meaning that at a certain time you may find that the religious leaders, maybe they also beat their wives, or they violate their wives and their children inside the house. That's what I'm talking about, the issue of opening up, of not being silent, and it becomes a very big problem. But again, if you remember, there is a model that we usually use, whether a model or what, that when the communities had refused to immunize their children, they invited the Kabaka of Uganda, and when they saw the Kabaka of Uganda immunizing a child, the following day all mothers and the fathers brought their children. And to me, I think this model can work for us. If the religious leaders come out to speak openly, if the cultural leaders come to speak openly, then maybe we may see a change. That would be one of my recommendations. And definitely when you go back into the gender relation that she was talking about, the socialization and what, of how we have been brought at our household level, of where a mother and a father is looking at Romeo as a special person, as a child. Has this child been home? Has he reached home? Has he eaten? And maybe you find that the mother and the father is saying, "Susan, what are you doing? Have you given Romeo food?" And even when Romeo is beating Susan because Susan has not given food, it is normal. So the same thing happens if this woman marries and then the husband is beating her. It's like it is okay. So there are those cases where people are quiet. If you talk again of recommendations, I was here asking myself.
Let us go back to the cultural leaders. I talked to you about that issue of a woman who was chased off her land after she actually lost her husband. The cultural leaders were actually instigating this. They sat in a tribunal and they said, "You know what, you need to leave this land." You understand? So the cultural leaders are also playing a part in increasing gender-based violence against the women. This woman lost the land because she didn't have $3 to go and expedite an investigation at the police station.
No, I don't want to be emotional because there is a case that I'm following up where the cultural leaders and the religious leaders are actually asking the woman that she should come out strongly and leave the husband's house, and the husband has a right to sell the property. So I don't want to be emotional on this because it is something that touches me.
Indeed.
But I think what Susan says, one of the things that government has to do and working closely with civil society is to continue changing the mindset. The mindset, I don't blame the religious leaders, I don't blame the cultural leaders, because this is where they came from.
Mindset change.
You know, the mindset change. And I told you that the reason why we really put our program in Ruchiga, we really wanted to know exactly those women who lost their husbands, have they been allowed to use their land? And the cases are too huge to the extent, I don't know whether we say cases are huge in law, but I think there are many cases coming out that the family members still believe that the woman should not own land even after when the husband has been seized. So it is a very huge issue, and to me again I take it back to the issue of continuous capacity building and mindset change, so that we can be able to change some of these things. And then maybe one thing that I think UWONET and us have been working on is to make sure that issues of land come out strongly. In Uganda we have a land movement where UWONET and WEGSIDA are part, and then we have the international arm of land movement advocates, where we are saying that Romeo, you are supposed to be added here as a media person, as a journalist. It is not about coming to ask the question. It is about, again, to go deeper, to do research. And I used 3 things. When I was thinking about that, I put 3 things, the 3 I's and maybe the 4 I. I am like, if we can all involve ourselves, if we can all innovate the ideas, because it is not about the women's rights organization that are going to innovate ideas to help reduce gender-based violence. And when you go to the issue of land, access and control and ownership, it becomes a different story. And maybe that should be another conversation, because it is too huge. Gender-based violence related to land is again huge, that we may not even discuss now. And then I was looking at the issue of integrating. Recently, the government of Uganda, recently civil society and the different partners are looking at the issue of integrating, because we are talking about inclusion. We are talking about no leaving anyone behind, but we are not integrating issues, and we are not going to say that yes, NLM has a manifesto and the women movement have a manifesto, but these manifestos have to come together so that we can be able to integrate, to find out if Uganda has 41 or 43 trillion that is putting under its budget. How are we going to integrate it at different level? Not necessarily only the sectors that Susan raised, but when you look at our national development plan, women and girls are supposed to be integrated anywhere. Even in defense, we have women in defense. We have women in security who also go to the bush. So we need to look at them. Are they violated? Because we have work-related violences. And then I was looking at the last I of inclusion. You know, how do we think of inclusion? How do we talk about gender-based violence? Not only looking at women and girls, but again knowing exactly why, the root cause, you know, not the ones I mentioned before, alcohol, unemployment and poverty. We can go deeper together, and then I think at the end we may need to register sustainable development. Indeed,
Elliot Orizara couldn't have nailed that submission on the head. Thank you very much. Let's also bring in Susan Chen and talk about recommendations before I let you two go. What kind of recommendations are coming in from UWONET to help us prevent violence against women and girls?
My constant call to action actually goes to the community. You know, Elliot referred to silence. Violence thrives on silence. For as long as we, as the people who live in these neighborhoods, it doesn't happen far from us. We tend to think it's happening in the neighbor's backyard. No, it's happening right under our noses. For as long as we continue to accept it, to trivialize it, then, you know, it just gets entrenched. So it starts with us. If a community can reject that kind of behavior, then they are going to reach the stage where the point at which they are asking for they are demanding greater accountability from the government to make sure that systems work, that those negative, that antisocial behavior is not happening. So it's really for communities to condemn, to prevent, not to connive with perpetrators, and not to connive with institutions to let perpetrators go off the hook. Yes, it really starts with us.
All right. That was an amazing conversation with, that is Elliot Orizarwa, the ED for Women and Girl Child Development Association of Uganda. We also did have Susan Chen, the current program lead of Women's Rights and Access to Justice at Uganda's Women's Network. From NMG, would like to let the whole world know that yes, silence is complicity in crime. When you see someone being violated and you keep quiet, you are part of the problem. More or less, yes. And we also do know that, yes, if you are violating a woman, in turn, you are violating your own mother. Never forget that. When you violate a woman, you are violating your own mother. Good afternoon.